Hey everyone, welcome back to the Neurologic Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Joe, and today I'm joined by my guest, Dr. David Hardy. Thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here, Dr. Joe. Thank you.
Where are you calling us from today, Dr. Hardy?
Right now, I'm in my clinic in Red Deer, Alberta.
Okay.
And before that, I practiced down in the States as well, in North Carolina and Ohio.
Very nice.
Yeah.
I believe the topic of discussion today is the brain is not a chemical organ. However, it's an organ with chemicals. And we're going to talk about how that relates to physical health and addiction, etc. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of topics obviously come up in a functional neurology practice, and so many people are coming in with different medications or self-medicating or just exploring things. And of course, the traditional healthcare model has always kind of been the medication approach for different injuries or conditions. So a lot of times, though, I ask people, well, what type of organ is the brain? And you kind of get crickets when that's said. And well, of course, the brain's a sensory motor organ. So it's constantly taking in information from our outside world and then processing it. So a lot of times we go into different wiring diagrams, obviously. So yeah, the pathways in the brain are extremely important from receptor, spinal cord, all the way up into the brain and then back down. So we need to talk about it more, kind of that stimulation model and approach of what actual we're doing with the organ we're working with. And then, of course, well, it's not a chemical organ, as in it's not a gland producing chemicals, but of course, it does have cells, and those cells need to be supported metabolically. So it's kind of just a little shift in our thinking, I guess.
Right. And I would say that supporting the brain from a cellular component and looking at all the maybe neurotransmitters and the chemicals that are associated with the brain hasn't necessarily been a topic of discussion on this show yet. So I'm very excited to dive deeper into it with you. Before we do that, though, I always like to ask a little bit about each of my guests. So why are you interested in this topic in particular? And I guess why choose this topic, I guess?
Yeah, I guess a lot of it is my own personal journey through functional neurology and my own health. So kind of just a little background. Growing up, I kind of struggled learning English and kind of had a few delays that way. And then through contact sports, had a few concussions and brain injuries as well. And I didn't quite know kind of how affected my brain was until I got better. And it was when I was at Life University and was able to work with everyone in the functional neurology field that I started to work on my own brain and how it was functioning. And yeah, I'll never forget it. I went to Dr. Ellis when I was a student, and he gave me these exercises and told me to do them every single hour. And so I'm out there like in between classes and doing these exercises. And on day 3, it was like a switch flipped in my brain, and I just felt this calm come over me that I hadn't felt before. And the other really impactful thing that happened was my vision went clear. Like colors just seemed brighter, and everything was just functioning better. And then later on, when I started to explore more into the functional medicine side of things, kind of same thing happened, was that I started to really look at my own lab work, diet, supplementation, and same thing, that when I was stressed out, my vision just kind of slowly got duller. And with going through that route, just supporting the cells and making sure inflammation was down, that I noticed once again things became clearer, brighter, and everything was just easier, and my level of performance went up. So kind of just looking at those two perspectives is really taken my health farther. And it's one of those things. I was still performing extremely well, but it just took me farther, and it's really amazing what can happen when we actually dive into these two arenas and combine them in the proper approach. And then too, like when I went into the clinical side of things, different conditions. So like with, once again, the concussions that I was working with and brain injuries, always the stimulation model worked extremely well, and we were able to get people better. But in like different cases of cognitive decline, where kind of the cellular function wasn't working too well, I found that I wasn't getting the results I wanted as much with the stimulation model, and had to dive deeper into, okay, supporting the cells and neurons so that the results were where I'd like them and where the patient would like to be.
You mentioned that just kind of looking at your own brain performance, you like to monitor your labs and things like that. What things in particular did you like to keep a close eye on to kind of gauge the health of how your brain was doing, maybe metabolically?
Metabolically, of course, just a standard lab panel was always good. And of course, that gives a lot of inflammatory markers, CRP, cholesterol, all sorts of kind of inflammatory markers once again. And then looking into one differentiation of different immune cells, of course, kind of told me that, yeah, there's probably some immune function that needs to be boosted or shifted functions. So, or just kind of an underlying pathogen that just hasn't been cleared. So everybody's got, of course, a pathogen load in their body, but if the immune system's kind of tired, or inflamed, then of course that pathogen load's going to be higher and affect you differently. And, we've even seen that in papers like Dr. Azzolino one, when he looks at concussions long lingering with Lyme disease. So
yeah, we actually interviewed Dr. Azzolino, so that's in a previous season if anyone listening is interested in that particular paper. But it's a really good interview, really good discussion with Dr. Azzolino. So the topic that you wanted to discuss is kind of like I want to look at the brain as not being a chemical organ. So can you explain maybe what the current understanding of the brain is from that model and why that might not be accurate?
Right. Well, once again, so many people, you look at the intake forms coming in, and a lot of them are gonna go into mental health issues. So whether it's anxiety, frustration, anger, there's always an increased emotionality when the brain isn't functioning properly. So the key is there any physical drivers towards that? And once again, all these people are usually coming in on a medication to help them deal with that, or they're self-medicating on their own. And a lot of it too is keeping them in an arena where they can kind of go day to day and get by. But the underlying causes of what's driving that emotionality is not being looked at. And if we go back kind of into how the brain functions and flows, well, everything comes in through a receptor, and then of course goes into the brain, is processed, and then you have an output, whether it's emotion, whether it's muscle tone, anywhere the brain sends a signal after that processing. And with that kind of flow of information, we need to look, okay, well, what receptors? And I think if we change the approach where we talk, okay, well, what is getting communicated up to the brain that's causing these disorders, or what isn't being inhibited, then we'd be able to get a lot more results than kind of, once again, just dulling down the information that's going in the brain so that we don't feel it as much. And if you look at emotions, well, another word for emotion is feelings. Well, what's the root word of feelings? Well, feel. So once again, it all goes back to receptor information flow going up to the brain. And that's a system we can hack and really improve and function better. And once again, really improve the lives of people that are having these issues or problems. And it goes far beyond just one condition. When we kind of take that approach, we can look at the multiple conditions that come into functional neurology office, whether it's a degenerating disease like Alzheimer's, cognitive decline, Parkinson's, multiple sclerosis, and or whether it's kind of more of a neurodevelopmental disorder. So there's a lot that can be done. And when we look at kind of in the physical modality world, we deal mainly with pain. Once again, pain is a feeling causing all sorts of emotionality. And so many of these receptor-based approaches have been really effective in dulling down or improving pain and increasing other sensations, which make life richer and fuller.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Um, Typically, you touched on, a few different conditions, namely, dementia. You mentioned anxiety and depression earlier, I believe. Um, I believe typically in the current dichotomy of patient care, at least kind of the medical mainstream route, uh, a lot of times, there'll be uh, prescribed medication, SSRIs, etc., which definitely has its place and can be incredibly helpful for certain people.
Absolutely.
How does kind of the way that maybe you would approach a patient, or maybe I or other people, other colleagues of ours would approach a patient that may provide an alternate perspective and approach to these patients?
Right. Well, actually, when I was practicing in the States, one of the groups of patients that would come through was referrals from different counselors within the addiction realm.
Mm,
So we would be looking at, once again, okay, well, what's going on in the nervous system that's causing these urges?
mhm,
Well, once again, we can kind of measure brain output several different ways. So we can look at, once again, the output of the system, like looking at eye movements, control of muscles, and we can also dive into QEEG and look at the oscillations of our pulses of these different neurons and systems. So I was looking at basically, once again, whether a system was firing too much. So the neurons are just, once again, firing and it's causing all sorts of, well, usually anxiety or one of those types of disorders where people are looking for something to dull that down. Or is it basically an alertness problem where the neurons are firing too slowly and we need to look at a way to excite those parts of the brain so that we increase how that person feels without having to use a substance to do that. We can once again train the brain and these neurons to kind of be in a range where you get better results. And then it matched up great with what the counselors were doing because, of course, anytime people have these issues, there's all sorts of social problems. And the main thing they kind of said back to us was that quite often they'd kind of be stuck where their therapies were going, and that after they saw us, they were able to process things better and kind of reach a new level in the therapy and counseling that they were doing. So there's really a huge synergistic effect when you look at matching both brain health with mental health and
mhm.
taking that team approach.
And I'm glad you brought up addiction. It's a very difficult thing to work with, and it's very complex. A lot of different variables that come along with addiction. no matter what it is, right? Um, how do you approach that with your different levels of expertise? And sorry if you're repeating yourself a little bit. I know you touched on some of these things,
Right.
but can you just touch on maybe some of the various factors that come along with addiction and how you can kind of manage those things?
Yeah, definitely. So you have to look at the chemical side of things. Uh, well, let's take a substance that benzos or something. Well, what's that drug used for? Well, it it usually affects the serotonergic system. Well, does that match up with our findings in our neurologic exam? Like, are there issues within pons, lower brainstem, that fires into these receptors? And once again, can we train the neurons to have better connections and fire more appropriately instead of needing something to chemically induce it into a state where it functions better? So um, a lot of it is kind of, once again, looking at the state. Well, is somebody once again looking for an upper or downer? And does that match up with what we find in our neurologic examinations and in the parts of the brain that we notice deficiencies? And is there again a way we can exercise, stimulate, or support these parts of the brain metabolically to get them to fire better and function on their own without needing that chemical crutch? And then also you find a lot of impulsivity with addictions. So looking at the circuitry that affects impulsivity, and once again trying to get these to be more efficient in how they run, so that both the urges go down and of course the impulsivities aren't as high as they usually are. So there's all sorts of physical and drivers behind why people would want to use different substances. And then too, you look at a lot of the damage that happens from this. Well, you need to address that as well, or you're never going to be able to kind of walk somebody through the therapies on the counseling side as efficiently as if you if you do kind of uh, once again get the cells healthier, get the brain firing at a new level, so that people are able to deal with all the sensory information coming through there and how they react to different scenarios. And so that kind of the cues that would lead them back into maybe a relapse aren't as strong, and that they're able to once again kind of push that urge or impulse out of the way, so they're able to go on with their daily lives and not slip back into using.
And when you think about the cellular health of the neuron, right? You touched on pretty robustly that stimulation can be such a huge tool for us in kind of healing these brains that have had long-term substance dependence. Um, we also, when you think about cellular health, you mentioned earlier, um, you want to think about metabolic support, nutritional support, fuel basically delivery to those cells and improving the integrity of them. What are some ways, based on your functional medicine practice, that you've been able to do that?
Um, Basically, to kind of simplify it a bit, is you take away the stuff that's going to send it in the wrong direction. And like in the functional medicine realm, there, of course, so much of it goes back to the gut health, and kind of being the baseline starting point is you get the gut health to work better. And well, another way to kind of look at it, whether it's with a food addiction or once again kind of that depression side of things, where cells aren't working properly, is anytime we put something into our mouth and eat, it's either going to give us satisfaction, which we want to go towards more and more. And the other thing is, well, it's all sending a signal up to the brain of, okay, how pleasurable this is, or sometimes that's mixed Whereas, yeah, you might have great taste with something, but really by the time it gets down to the gut, the communication going to the brain is that, well, this is not a good substance and it's starting to kind of make me feel almost almost sick, basically. So anytime we put anything into our system, all of that information is going up into the brain and changes our state. So if we look at food, once again, you're either sending the right communication up to the brain saying there's all sorts of nutrients coming into the system and I should feel more alive, more energetic, or basically this is a substance that is kind of destroying my gut lining, the good bacteria in there. It's hard to process. And really, it's starting to make me feel sluggish, dull, and not work properly. So taking away the bad foods, obviously, are the things that are going to, once again, send the wrong signals up to our brain or kind of destroy the lining or the good bacteria, or communicate to the brain that, well, we don't like this food and it's starting an immune reaction. So lots of food sensitivities in that way, if they show up, need to be eliminated. And then putting the right stuff into the tank that are going to send the correct signals up to the brain, make us feel more energetic, and give us that proper mood that we need. And I think if we start looking at food is, once again, what signal, what communication, what's it telling us subconsciously that we're not really aware of when we first start eating something, uh, then our habits will change, because once again we're thinking of ultimately the state we want to be in, instead of the instant gratification of say a candy bar or something. And then of course everything in the human body starts with energy. So if the communication is that we have a huge burst of energy, then we're going to get a huge crash with that as well. So having a nice stable source of energy that's going to support brain function and keep those neurons going is key as well. You've got to manage the blood sugar levels, because, well, the brain requires most of the energy, well, a good chunk of the energy in the body, and it can't store or process it itself. It's reliant on all the other organs to get that fuel source up to the brain so that we can use it. So blood sugars are key, and then once again looking at whether the food's gonna be one that energizes us or one that depletes our energy and makes us feel sluggish and depressed.
Mhm. So there are a lot of different diets out there, since you mentioned uh, diet and the importance of that and sustaining blood sugar across for the brain. We've got anything from the vegan diet to the carnivore diet and everything in between. Based on your understanding, what do you like for brain health optimally?
Optimally for brain health, basically when somebody's coming in with a condition, once again, long lingering concussions, quite commonly you're going to see something show up on the lab that indicates what diet you need to put them on.
Mm-hmm.
And like one patient that comes to mind was one we were working with quite regularly, and she was noticing that basically after 3 weeks she'd start to notice a dip or crash in uh, in her performance and how she was responding to treatments and therapies. And it showed up on the blood work that there was kind of a low level of anemia. So she wasn't able to obviously get the oxygen up into the brain at the appropriate levels to actually function properly. And hence why she was having the crashes. So she needed to be supplemented, obviously, in that case. As far as kind of other diets go, without the supplementation, impact at it, obviously kind of more during the winter months, if somebody's able to, a ketogenic diet is really appropriate for that. Once again, if you kind of look at how nature provides us food, well, in the winter, once again, we kind of get away from the sugars and become more fat orientated in our diets.
Hmm.
So kind of matching that up, and then with different activities level, well, obviously you can introduce more fruits in summertime where people are more active and they're getting bombarded more with sunlight. So kind of looking at the seasons is one aspect to look at it. And of course, being in Canada, well, we notice the sunlight and are really affected each winter by lack of it. So looking at the energy sources to be appropriate with kind of time of year is one thing to look at. And then, of course, there needs to be a good source of protein, but everything basically is going to come down to how much clean, healthy vegetables you're eating, first of all. So that should be the top of what everybody's thinking of when, when they're looking at their nutrition. I'm a huge proponent at looking at the foods that are good for you, that you like and enjoy, and developing your recipes, your meal plans around that versus uh, focusing on what foods you can't have. Because once again, if you focus on the things that you need to restrict from your diet, then it becomes like homework. You just don't want to do it eventually, and it's unsustainable. So a lot of it comes down to individual tastes and preferences that way, and building off of what people kind of like, crave, and enjoy with what could be healthier for them, and looking at the nutritional factors. And of course, the majority of that's going to come from the vegetables, and then proteins and healthy fats. I think fats is probably one of the most underlooked and utilized part of nutrition and diet is that we just add like a little bit here and there, or we're getting it mainly in our protein sources, and we're not getting the right types of fats into our brain to make them healthier. And of course, the brain is encased and has a huge fat content to it as well. So the better we can support it that way is huge with a brain-based diet.
Which I feel like this is something that gets brought up a lot on this show, but not necessarily something that I've taken a step back and kind of made sure that healthy fats is understood by the audience. Um, can you talk about the difference between a healthy fat and a unhealthy fat, and why that is so crucial for the brain, and why, maybe the whole non-fat or whatever diet phase wasn't such a good idea?
Yeah, for sure.
Not
Once
to go
again,
off
kind of
topic too
the
much,
whole
but
non-fat thing was just looking at calories, and
hmm.
we know not all calories are equal. And fat too is really good for kind of halting sensation, satiation, and cravings for more food. So it keeps us full longer. So we do need fats that way as well. And fats are a huge nutrition source, both energy wise and both as building blocks for the brain. So you want to look more at your vegetable fats, and your more omega-3 fats, because they're going to be the better building blocks, and also kind of have more of an anti-inflammatory aspect to them. So staying away from the heavily processed fats and the seed type fats are going to be more inflammatory. So it kind of needs to be close to being alive too type. So really hasn't been exposed to sun so that it denatures, and a really good source of fat. So kind of keeping it to your oh, say avocado fat, your extra virgin olive oil type ones. Coconut oil comes up quite a bit, although it's kind of one of those ones you need to look more at. If inflammation's too high, maybe coconut isn't a good fat to be putting in the system right away as well.
Hmm.
So, but sometimes the shorter chain fatty acids are once again going to be better building blocks or better fuel for the brain.
How does that? How do those healthy fats then help to regulate the hormone balance in the brain? Kind of tying back to the initial topic.
Right. Building blocks for hormones going to be cholesterol. So if you're not getting the proper fats, then you're not getting the building block, the first step in producing a hormone. And two, if we look at once again that signal going in from the moment we taste the food to when it's digested, what it's saying to the brain is, well, maybe we don't have enough of this nutrient or fat to actually kind of build too much of this. So maybe we need to hold back on some of the production when we signal down to a gland to excrete a certain hormone. And the same goes for blood sugars. Well, if there's a dip in energy, or it's unsustained, or it's dysregulated, then those signals are going to once again go up to the brain and then fire down through a nerve that goes to that gland that secretes insulin, ghrelin, all sorts of different hormones that are in our energy systems.
Right. Dr. Hardy, we are just about out of time. We're kind of hitting that end point. But I wanted to make sure we budgeted enough time for you to hit on any kind of closing thoughts or any words of advice for any listeners we might have.
Right. I guess the biggest thing is once again looking at everything that comes in the system is important. Times a day that we get different stimulation, and of course, if there's something going on, what kind of excites our brain and puts us into a different state or mood that makes us function better in life, and go from there. It's an amazing process when we go through it later on. And when I talk about brain function, once again, kind of neurons that fire too much, too little, or just the right amount, it's finding that balance. And sometimes if we just keep it as simple as that, is it's almost like Goldilocks and Three Little Bears. You got too much, too little, or just enough. And that goes into the nutrition, of course, as well. It's just finding that right key balance. And if we're out of this balance, then, well, how do we get ourselves back into it? And the stimulation model of getting the brain to fire better and then supporting it is just so key for our overall health, well-being, and mainly how we feel and are able to enjoy ourselves.
Yeah, that was perfectly said. If anyone listening to this really resonated with what you said and wants to reach out to you, whether to find more information or to potentially seek your care, how would they go about doing that?
Right. So right now I'm at Collegiate Sports Medicine in Red Deer, Alberta. And then too on social media, we've got our Collegiate Sports Medicine social media. And then I've started kind of my own stuff as well with Facebook and Instagram with the Hardy Brain.
Okay. Very nice. Well, we'll be sure to try to link to that in our show notes and other ways we promote this. So,
all right.
Thanks for joining me today, Dr. Hardy. This was great. Provided a new dynamic and perspective for people who are listening, I'm sure. So we really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Joe.
Of course. All right. From your host at the Neuro Wellness Podcast, be well.